There is a way of breathing for which a man was beaten until he lost consciousness, had his hands cut off, had his feet cut off, was beheaded, his body burned, and his ashes thrown into a river so that not a single particle of him would remain on this earth. It was not for raising a sword. It was not for raising an army. It was not for stealing gold or betraying a king. It was for breathing, for teaching ordinary people how to inhabit the tiny space that exists between one inhalation and the next. A place so silent, so utterly empty, that whoever learned to enter it stopped being afraid. And a human being without fear is the most dangerous thing that exists for any system of control. You were told that time is a straight line, that you were born at one point and move, without remedy, toward another point that has a name: the end. You were taught to live dragged between what you have already lost and what you still fear losing, and they called that normal. Today you will discover why the mystics who learned to step outside that line were hunted to their deaths. You will meet the forbidden doctrine of the unity of being, the three-word phrase that cost a man his entire life. The neuroscience that today confirms in a laboratory what they knew 1,000 years ago, and a concrete practice at the end of this documentary for you to find yourself, that space between thoughts where time simply stops running. This is not religious poetry. This is a technology of consciousness. And it begins in Baghdad, more than 1,000 years ago, with a man who laughed while they killed him. Let us begin.
Chapter 1. The Carder of Souls. His trade was carding cotton. That is what his name means, Hallaj, in the language of his land. The one who separates the tangled fibers, the one who takes a dense, confused, matted mass and opens it, combing it until it grows light, airy, until light can pass straight through it. His father did this with cotton, with his own hands, at a workbench, day after day, in a dusty town in southern Persia. The son would end up doing it with something far harder to comb than cotton. He would do it with human souls. That is why, centuries after his death, once the horror of his execution had already hardened into legend, tradition would remember him by a strange and beautiful title: the Carder of Intimate Secrets. The man who took hearts clenched tight by fear, hardened by pain, and opened them patiently until light could pass through them again. Allow me to introduce myself as what I am within this investigation. I am a voice that has spent years bent over the remains of his story, over his manuscripts, half burned, saved by disciples who copied them in secret, over the records of his trial, reconstructed fragment by fragment. Over the 4 monumental volumes a French scholar devoted an entire lifetime to, rescuing every hour, every word, every step this man took. I am going to tell you his story at times as if he himself were telling it in the first person, because that is the only way you will not hear it as a distant fact, but feel it beating. But I want you to understand something from this first minute and not forget it in the nearly 2 hours we're about to spend together. What you are going to hear is myth, is philosophy, is an ancient map of the human mind drawn by men who dared to explore territories most people never set foot. I am not asking you to believe it the way one believes a headline. I am asking you to listen to it the way one listens to a key finally turning in a lock you had spent your whole life trying and failing to open. He was born around the year 858 of our era, in a region of what is today southern Iran, at a time when the most powerful, most learned, most dazzling empire on earth was called the Abbasid Caliphate, and its capital, Baghdad, was the luminous heart of civilization. While much of Europe sank into dark centuries, Baghdad was translating the books of the Greeks, laying the foundations of algebra, mapping the stars, and debating philosophy in palaces of unimaginable wealth. That was the stage, an empire at the height of its splendor and its power. His grandfather, they say, had been a fire priest, an adept of the ancient Persian religion, Zoroastrianism, before the family embraced Islam. So already, in his blood, two worlds coexisted. The sacred fire the ancient Persians worshipped as a symbol of the divine, and the revealed word the new faith recited. Perhaps that is where his double thirst came from, his inability to settle for a single way of touching the sacred. Before he turned 12, he had memorized the entire Quran, word for word, the complete work. A child capable of holding a sacred book inside his own head. But, and here lies the first seed of everything that would follow, memorizing the words was never enough for him. He could recite every one of them and still feel the essence slipping away. He wanted what lay beneath the words. He wanted the experience that had given birth to the words. He wanted the source itself, not the jar that carried it. And so, very young, he began to search. He was not a comfortable seeker. The answers of the teachers in his own town were not enough for him. He left for Basra, a great port city, a hive of commerce, ideas, and rebellions. There he married, in a marriage that would last his entire life and to which he would remain faithful until the end. Something that, oddly enough, scandalized some of his own teachers, who looked with suspicion on a mystic who gave his heart to a single woman. There, for the first time, he wore the coarse, rough wool robe of the Sufi. And here I need to pause, because you have to understand who the Sufis were to understand why his story ended on a pyre. Islam, like every great religion, had its outer face and its inner face. The outer face was law, ritual, obedience, praying 5 times, fasting, making pilgrimage, keeping the rules. A magnificent architecture of duties that ordered the lives of millions. But there were men and women for whom that was not enough. Just as reciting was never enough for the child al-Hallaj, they wanted more. They did not want merely to obey God from the outside, the way a subject obeys a distant king he has never seen. They wanted to know him from within. They wanted to burn, to dissolve, to merge with the divine until no distance remained. Those seekers of the inner fire were called Sufis, perhaps for the wool, the suf of their humble robes. They were the mystics of Islam, the impatient one, the ones who did not want to wait for paradise after death, because they wanted to touch eternity now, in this very life, with this very body. And al-Hallaj plunged into that path with an intensity that frightened even the other mystics. He made pilgrimage to Mecca, the holy city, the destination of every Muslim. But he did not go the way pilgrims go, to perform the rite and return. Upon arriving, he made a vow that already says everything about the kind of man he was, about the abyss he was willing to lean into. He committed to remain a full year, seated in the courtyard of the great sanctuary, in strict fasting and absolute silence. A year, 12 months, without speaking, almost without eating. Motionless while crowds of pilgrims circled around him in an endless human sea. What was a man searching for in that void he was digging with his own fingernails? What lay at the bottom of that year-long silence that none of the thousands of people passing by, absorbed in their own prayers and affairs, could even begin to imagine? He found something. Because when he returned from that year of silence, he had changed in a deep and irreversible way, and his first act upon returning is the first crack from which, like water breaking through a failing dam, absolutely everything else would pour. He removed the Sufi robe, the wool tunic, the sacred uniform of the initiated. He did not do it to renounce the path. He did it for the opposite reason, out of a more radical fidelity to. He removed it because he wanted to preach freely, in the street, in the square, in the marketplace, in the plain language of the people, without the uniform that sealed him inside a separate caste, an elite of spiritual experts. And this gesture, which may seem small to you, was a bomb. Because the other Sufi masters had an iron rule, unwritten but sacred. Deep knowledge, the direct experience of union with the divine, is never shared with the masses. Never. It is like placing fire in the hands of a child. The final truths are transmitted in whispers, from master to disciple, after years of preparation, of trials, of purification. The common people are not ready. The common people will misunderstand it, will profane it, will burn themselves on it. Guard the secret. That was the commandment. Al-Hallaj shattered it. He walked out into the squares of Baghdad, to which he had returned with his family, and spoke to the wool carders, like his father, to the water carriers, the beggars, the shopkeepers, the women buying at the market. And he told them, in words anyone could understand, something revolutionary, that God was not far away, that God was not up there, locked in an unreachable heaven, administered by priests, mediated by scholars, accessible only by paying the correct price in obedience and submission. He told them that God was within, in the very depths of their own soul, that they could find him themselves, each one of them, without intermediaries, without paying tribute, without asking permission from any authority. Stop and breathe for a moment on the magnitude of what that meant, in that time and place. The entire power structure of his era, religious, political, economic, which were in truth one single thing woven together, rested on a single master idea, that between the human being and the sacred there opened an unbridgeable distance, and that only certain authorized, ordained, anointed people could build the bridge across that abyss. The temples lived off that distance. The priests fed off that distance. The thrones legitimized themselves by invoking that distance, presenting themselves as the representatives of God on earth. And suddenly, a cotton carder, a man with no office, no title, stood in the marketplace and told the humblest people that the distance did not exist, that no bridge was needed, that the bridge was themselves, that the sacred beat inside their own chest and had always been there, waiting for them to stop looking outward to find it. No sword, no invading army, no palace conspiracy threatens an empire as much as that single idea, because a people convinced they need intermediaries to reach the sacred is a governable, milkable, obedient people, and a people convinced they carry the sacred within them, free, available, is a people that one day asks itself exactly what use the ones standing in the middle serve. But Al-Hallaj did not stop in Baghdad. His thirst pushed him further than any mystic of his tradition had gone. He traveled to places no Sufi had ever set foot in. He crossed borders, deserts, mountains, reaching all the way to India, to the lands of Central Asia, beyond the known edge of the Islamic world. And in every place, under every different sky, among people who worshipped other gods under other names in other tongues, he found buried the same seed, the same secret intuition repeated again and again, that the separation between the human being and the ultimate ground of reality is an illusion, that in the heart of the great traditions, once you scraped away the surface of their rites and doctrines, a single shared secret was beating. He returned to Baghdad transformed a second time, kindled, burning, and, it must be said, reckless, because what he had seen was too vast to keep silent, and he had already decided, long ago, that he would not stay silent. And then, one day, it happened. In a state his followers would call ecstasy, and his enemies would call madness, or arrogance, or the worst of all blasphemies, Al-Hallaj spoke 3 words aloud. 3 words that would pursue him for the rest of his life and far beyond his death. 3 words that would be his glory to some and his death sentence to others. Ana al-Haqq. I am the truth, and I need you to understand the exact weight, the crushing weight of those 3 words, because otherwise, nothing that follows will make sense. In the language and faith of his time, the truth, al-Haqq, was not an ordinary word. It was one of the 99 sacred names of God, one of the names by which the Absolute, the Creator, the Almighty was invoked. So saying, I am al-Haqq, did not mean, to the ears of anyone listening, I am right, or I speak true things. It meant with no possible ambiguity, I am God, a man, a cotton carder, son of a cotton carder, with no authority beyond his own voice, standing in a square, or in the dim light of a mosque, or in the circle of his disciples, saying aloud, for all to hear, the one thing no human being of his world was permitted even to think in the privacy of his own mind, let alone proclaim. The whole city shuddered, as though the earth had trembled. The news spread from mouth to mouth. The jurists, the scholars of religious law, split into opposing camps. Some demanded his head at once, outraged, scandalized, certain they stood before the worst of heretics. Others, more cautious or wiser, hesitated. One of them, a respected jurist, refused to condemn him with a remarkable argument. He said that spiritual inspiration, what occurs in the heart of a man seized by divine ecstasy, lay beyond his jurisdiction, that it was not for a human tribunal to judge what passed in the secret of another man's soul, but the seed of scandal had already been planted and watered. And what would make it grow into a death sentence was not theology alone, was not merely the dispute over whether those words were blasphemy or ecstasy. It was something far more earthly, far older, far more recognizable, something you will see repeat itself in every age of human history down to this very day. Power felt threatened, because by then al-Hallaj's preaching had caught in Baghdad like fire in a dry field. He was no longer a solitary mystic murmuring in a corner. There was a movement forming around him. There were people demanding reform, beginning to question the powerful, beginning to look inward instead of upward, toward the throne and the altar. And a people who learn to look inward are a people who, sooner or later, stop looking at the throne with the submissive eyes the throne requires. He had become a problem, a political problem dressed in the robes of religious scandal. They arrested him, they locked him in a cell in Baghdad, and there, in the darkness, between walls of stone, he remained for 9 years. 9 years. Stop on that number. They did not kill him at once, in the heat of the scandal. They let him rot in a prison for nearly a decade, while the factions of the court fought over his fate like dogs over a bone, while his fortunes rose and fell depending on which enemy or which protector held more sway over the caliph that month, that season, that year. 9 years of confinement for a man who had preached the most absolute freedom, an interior freedom, locked behind walls of cold stone. And yet, here opens the first door of the mystery, a door I am going to leave ajar so its light accompanies you through this entire documentary. Those who visited him during those years, those who left testimony of how he was, did not describe a broken man. They did not describe a desperate man beating against the walls, or a defeated man consumed by resentment. They described someone who seemed, in a way they could not comprehend, at peace, serene, as if the walls of the cell were not truly there, as if the 9 years were not 9 years at all, but a single sustained instant, breath after breath, in a place the bars could never reach. What did this man know? What had he found in that year of silence in the courtyard of Mecca, in that secret space he taught to water carriers and beggars, that allowed him to inhabit a cell the way one inhabits eternity? And why, when at last, after 9 years, the appointed day of his execution arrived, did the witnesses not report that he screamed in terror, or begged for mercy, or broke down? But that, as tradition has carried for 1,000 years, he smiled. Hold that question close to, because we are going to answer it, fully, before this documentary ends. But to truly understand the answer, so it does not slide past you as just another curiosity, you first have to see, with your own eyes, the prison you yourself are living in right now, at this very instant, without even knowing you are inside it. If this man's story has kindled something in you, if you sense that you did not arrive at this documentary by accident, but because something brought you here, take 1 second and subscribe to this channel. Here we rescue exactly this. The wisdom that someone at some point in history decided was too dangerous for people like you and me to know. Activate the notification bell, because what comes in the next few minutes is going to change the way you perceive something you have, until now, believed as solid, as undeniable, as real as the ground beneath your feet, the passage of time. Now, let us continue, because we need to meet the jailer, and the jailer, you will discover with a chill, is not outside. Chapter 2. The Invisible Prison. I want you to run an experiment with me. It is very simple and will cost you nothing, but it may be one of the most revealing things you do today. Right now, without changing anything, observe where your mind is, not what you are listening to. That is only the surface. Observe what lies beneath, the murmur underneath. That kind of radio that never turns off and is always playing beneath everything you do. Because almost certainly, your mind is not here. It is somewhere else. It is replaying something that already happened. A conversation from yesterday that did not go the way you wanted. A mistake from last week that still stings. Something you said and wish you had not. An image of better times. An old wound that refuses to close. Or it is running forward toward what does not yet exist. What you have to do tomorrow. That bill that is due. That pending conversation that knots your stomach just imagining it. That uncertain future unfolding before you like a fog full of possible threats. Past, future, past, future. A pendulum swinging without rest, all day, every day. And rarely, almost never, does that pendulum stop here. In the one place where life is actually happening. The Sufis, those mystics of whom al-Hallaj was the brightest and most tragic star, had a name for the ordinary, everyday state of the human being. And it was not a flattering name. They called it simply the sleep. They said the vast majority of people walk through life asleep, that they eat asleep, work asleep, love asleep, grow old asleep, and die asleep, never once having fully awakened. Dreaming the past, dreaming the future, trapped in a continuous mental film they mistake for reality, and that only in rare instance, by accident, by a fright, by a flash of beauty, by a loss, does the human being wake up suddenly to the only place where life truly happens, which is now, this instant, this precise heartbeat, and that almost immediately they fall back asleep. A whole life spent dreaming of two places that do not exist, because that is the first thing I need you to see with absolute clarity, without cracks, since it is the cornerstone on which everything else is built. The past does not exist. Think about it truly. Do not let it pass as a pretty phrase. Search for it. Try to touch it, to point to it, to find it somewhere in the physical universe. You cannot. The past is nowhere. It is a set of images your brain reconstructs now in the present, and colors, almost always wrongly, almost always distorted, almost always with more pain or more nostalgia than it actually held when it was present. The past is a reconstruction that happens now, and the future does not exist either. It is a projection, a film your mind casts onto a blank screen, made of fears and desires, one that almost never resembles what actually ends up happening. Neither one, neither the past nor the future, has ever existed, nor will ever exist anywhere you can point your finger to. Only this instant exists. This one, and now this other one, and now this one. An infinite succession of present instants, of chained nows, which is the only thing that has existed since the beginning of time, and the only thing that ever will. And yet, and here lies the tragedy, here lies the master trap of human existence. We spend the overwhelming majority of our mental life trapped, locked, spinning without exit in the only two places that do not exist. Bleeding over a past that is no longer here, trembling over a future that has not yet arrived and perhaps never will. Absent, always absent, from the only real place. This is not a minor flaw. It is not a quirk. It is the central trap. And this is where the ancient myth of the Sufis intersects, in a way that should raise the hair on your skin, with something you can verify yourself today, in your own life, without needing to believe in anything esoteric at all. Think about how the world built around you in recent decades actually works. Think about what it feeds on. There exists today an industry, the most profitable and the most powerful in the history of humanity, designed with almost surgical precision to keep your mind exactly where we just said, outside this instant. Every time you swipe your thumb across a phone screen, every notification that lights up your attention like bait on a hook, every headline calibrated not to inform you, but to outrage you, to frighten you, to hook you. Every video that ends at the exact moment the next one begins, never giving you a single second of silence to return to yourself. Every app that opens onto an infinite stream of content that never, ever ends. A bottomless well designed to keep you falling. None of that is an accident. Listen carefully. None of it is coincident. All of it is calibrated, measured, optimized down to the last detail by the most sophisticated intelligence systems ever built by human beings. And all of them pursue a single objective, one rarely spoken aloud: capture your attention and never give it back. Because your attention, your mental time, your conscious energy is the most valuable commodity in the modern world. It is bought and sold. Entire economies are built on how many seconds they can steal from you and where they can drag your mind. Now, listen to how this connects to the ancients, because here is where past and present shake hands in a truly chilling way. The Sufis spoke of subtle forces that steal the energy of the human soul, that feed on distracted consciousness. The Gnostics, on the other side of the Mediterranean world, held an even bolder, darker vision. They spoke of entities, of powers they called archons, and of a false creator, the demiurge, who kept human souls asleep, trapped, deceived, inside a kind of farm, a system from which he extracted their spiritual energy the way one milks a herd. For centuries, all of that sounded like superstition, like dark mythology, like a mystic's delirium. But lift your gaze for a moment and look around you with new eyes. Look at the exact, literal, verifiable mechanics of what happens today. There exists a system, real, documented, worth billions, admitted even by its own creators in moments of honesty, whose business model consists, at its core, of extracting your attention, your time, your mental energy, and converting it into economic profit. A system that needs to keep you in two permanent states, because they are the two states in which you consume the most, react the most, and return the most. Nostalgia and resentment over what has already happened, or anxiety and desire over what you do not yet have. Depression and anxiety. Past and future. The only two places where you can do absolutely nothing. And for that very reason, precisely for that reason, the only two places where you are completely manageable. I am not telling you that literal invisible demons are milking your soul. I am asking you to see the archetype, the ancient pattern, playing out with chilling precision in the most concrete psychological and social reality of your daily life. The demiurge of the Gnostics, that force which convinces you that you are small, separate, and needy so that it can govern you, has today an incarnation that requires no faith at all to be real. It is the attention capture machinery you carry in your pocket, which switches on most of the time without you having consciously decided anything. And here lies the deeper reason, the reason why this system, ancient or modern, needs to keep you outside the present. Because a human being anchored in the present instant is a human being who cannot be controlled through fear. And fear is the primary lever of all control. Think about it. Fear needs a future in order to exist. It is impossible to fear something that is happening exactly now. Faced with what occurs in the present instant, one simply acts, responds, does what must be done. Fear always lives one step ahead, in the what if, in the projection of a threat that has not yet arrived. And guilt, shame, remorse, regret, everything that keeps you small, shrunken, and docile, always lives one step behind, in the past, in what you did or failed to do. Strip a human being of past and future, plant him whole and awake in the pure instant, and in that same act, you will have stripped the system of control of every one of its levers at once. There is nothing left to grab hold of, no fear to pull on, no guilt to bend him with. Now you begin to understand why al-Hallaj was dangerous, not for what he said about the nature of God, which in the end was a dispute among theologians. He was dangerous for what he did to people. He was making them free, and inner freedom, the kind that depends on no external circumstance, is the only form of freedom that no wall, no chain, no prison, no empire on earth can ever truly imprison. You can lock up the body of a free man, as they locked up al-Hallaj's for 9 years, but you cannot touch the place from which that man looks at you without fear, and that, for any power that stands on fear, is unbearable. The ancient mystics intuited all of this with the lens and the language of their time, and they called it the sleep, the prison, the veil covering the eyes of the soul. Today we can give it a different name, colder, almost clinical, a name that came not from a monastery, but from a neuroscience laboratory, and discover, with astonishment, that it describes with almost perfect fidelity exactly the same thing. Because it turns out, and this is one of the most astonishing things brain science has discovered in recent decades, that inside your head there exists a specific, physical, locatable neural network that switches on precisely when you stop focusing on the present. A network that manufactures, without your asking, and often against your will, that entire ceaseless murmur of past and future. A network that produces the voice that never stops talking. The scientists who discovered it gave it a technical name, and what they found about how to silence it matches, point by point, century after century, what that Carter of Souls was teaching in the dusty squares of Baghdad more than 1,000 years ago. Before we come face to face with that photographed jailer, we need to understand the full doctrine al-Hallaj breathed, because breath, without the understanding that accompanies it, is only air going in and out. What made this man dangerous was not a breathing technique. It was what that technique let him see, and what he saw has a name, a vertiginous doctrine that another mystic, born 3 centuries later in distant Andalusia, on the other end of the Islamic world, would elevate into the boldest, most persecuted teaching of the entire tradition. It is time to look in the mirror. It is time to discover that the I you believe yourself to be, that central character in the film of your life, may not be at all what you think it is. Chapter 3. Sophia's Mirror. The Self as Optical Illusion. His name was Ibn Arabi. He was born in the year 1165 in Murcia, in Muslim Andalusia, on the far end of the vast Islamic world, 3 centuries after al-Hallaj's ashes had dissolved into the waters of the Tigris. And yet these 2 men, separated by 300 years and half a planet, spoke of the same thing. They drank from the same secret source. Ibn Arabi would come to be known, over the centuries, by a title very few have ever earned in the history of human thought. Al-Sheikh al-Akbar, the greatest of masters, the supreme master. And he devoted his entire life, hundreds of volumes, thousands of pages of a density that still makes scholars tremble today, to trying to put into words something that, deep in his heart, he knew could never be fully spoken. Like someone trying to describe a color to a man born blind. Like someone trying to catch the ocean in a jar. But he tried, with a genius no one has matched, because he felt he had to leave the map drawn for those who would come after him. And to the thing he pursued without rest, he gave a name that would echo through the centuries, and that would also, not by accident, provoke persecution, condemnation, and burned books. Wahdat al-Wujud, the unity of being, the unity of existence. Stay very close to me now, because this is the hardest thing we're going to touch in this entire documentary, and at the same time the most important, the key that opens everything else. I am going to say it slowly. I am going to say it from several different angles with several images, circling it the way one circles a mountain looking for the path, until, at some point, maybe when you least expect it, something inside you clicks. Because this is not an idea you understand only with the intellect, filing it away in memory like a piece of data. This is an idea that at a certain instant is recognized, like someone who suddenly remembers something they had, at bottom, always known, but had forgotten they knew. The unity of being asserts this, and give it your full attention, that only one single reality exists, one alone, that at the ultimate root of everything that exists, there are not 2 things, nor 3, nor millions, but a single substance, a single being, a single existence manifesting itself in infinite forms, and that everything you perceive as separate, as distinct, as fragmented, you, me, this voice, the screen in front of you, the chair you are sitting in, the tree on the street, the farthest stars, the person you love, the pain in your chest, the joy of a child on the other side of the world. None of that is truly distinct things made of truly distinct substances. They are waves of one and the same ocean. They are passing forms adopted by a single infinite substance. Think of the image the masters themselves used. Imagine gold. A goldsmith takes gold and shapes it into 1,000 different jewels. A ring, a crown, a necklace, a bracelet, a statuette. Each jewel has its shape, its name, its function, its own beauty. The ring is not the necklace. The crown is not the bracelet. And if the jewels could think, each one would firmly believe it was a separate thing, with an identity of its own, distinct from all the others. But underneath all that multiplicity of forms, what is there? Gold. Only gold. The same gold in all of them. The form is real, yes. The ring exists as a ring, but the form is passing, borrowed, superficial. The substance, what it truly is one, and it is the same in everything. Now, have courage, because we are going to apply this to the thing you most firmly, most blindly believe you are. Yourself, your identity, that I, that carries your name, that bears your history, your memories, your wounds, your opinions, your fears, your plans. That character who has starred in every scene of the film of your life for as long as you can remember, and whom you take for granted as what you are. So obviously that you never even question it. Ibn Arabi, and before him, Al-Hallaj, not with ink but with his entire body handed over to the fire, said something devastating, something that can shake the ground beneath your feet if you truly let it in, that separate I does not exist the way you think it exists. It is an optical illusion of consciousness, a mirage. A wave that has forgotten it is the ocean and has begun to believe, terrified and alone, that it is only a wave, small, fragile, separate from all the others, and condemned to break against the shore and vanish forever into nothing. Let me give you another image, perhaps the most precise of all. Imagine the sun shining over the surface of the sea on a bright morning. On every small wave, on every crest, on every leaping droplet, a point of dazzling light appears. Millions and millions of bright points dancing over the water as far as the eye can see. Each of those points looks like a small independent sun with its own glow. But stop and think. How many suns are there really? There are not millions of suns. There is one single sun reflected across millions of different surfaces. The reflections believe they are many, each separate from the rest. The truth is that all of them are the same single light distributed, in appearance, by the changing shape of the water. That, said Ibn Arabi, is exactly what we are. Reflections, points of a single light contemplating itself through an infinite number of eyes. Every human being, every consciousness, is a place from which the one reality looks at itself. And the drama, the central tragedy of the human condition, the root of all our suffering, is that the reflection has forgotten the sun. The wave has forgotten the ocean. The drop believes it is only a drop. And in that forgetting, in that primordial amnesia, is born absolutely everything that makes us suffer. The fear of death, which is nothing other than the wave's terror of dissolving and disappearing. Endless greed, which is the wave's desperate attempt to grow ever larger, to accumulate, to fill a void that is, in truth, only the void of having forgotten what we are. Loneliness, which is the deepest lie of all, the belief that you are separate, isolated, cut off from the rest of existence, when in truth you never were, nor could you ever be. And now listen to this, because here is where more than 1,000 years of human spiritual history, across 3 continents that never once made contact, converge on a single burning point, and a chill should run through you entirely. Al-Hallaj, in Baghdad, at the heart of the Islamic world, cries out, "Ana al-Haqq, I am the truth, I am the ultimate reality," and they tear him apart for blasphemy. But far from there, centuries earlier, on the banks of other rivers, in ancient India, the anonymous sages who composed the Upanishads, the sacred texts of Hindu wisdom, had written an almost identical twin phrase, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, I am the Absolute. I am the ultimate reality that sustains the entire universe. And in the lands of the Eastern Mediterranean, in the first centuries of our era, a current of wisdom flourished and was brutally crushed. The one we call Gnosticism, and its secret teaching, the one that cost its texts to be burned and its masters hunted nearly out of history, was exactly the same. That within every human being lives a spark, a tiny but indestructible fragment of the original divine source, trapped, asleep, deceived by a false creator, the demiurge, who has built this prison of separation and convinced you that you are small, mortal, guilty, and alone, precisely so that he can govern you. 3 traditions, 3 continents that, at the time, had virtually no contact with one another. Different languages, different gods under different names, different centuries, cultures that never once sat down to speak with each other, and exactly the same forbidden secret beating at the heart of all 3. Separation is an illusion. You were never truly separate from the source, from the whole, from the divine. The wall that seems to divide you from everything else and lock you inside a small mortal skin is, at bottom, painted on air. It is as real as a mirage in the desert. You see it with perfect clarity. It shapes your behavior. You thirst toward it. But there is no water there. There never was. Here is where modern thought offers us an unexpected bridge to cross toward this ancient truth without needing religious faith. The great psychologist Carl Jung, already in the 20th century, using the language of the science of the mind, described something astonishingly similar. Jung distinguished between the ego, that small conscious I, that character with a name and a biography you believe yourself to be, which in reality is only a tiny island floating on an immense ocean, and what he called the self, the true totality of what we are, that deep center encompassing both the conscious and the unconscious, the personal and that which connects us to all of humanity and beyond. And Jung held that the great task of a human life, what he called the process of individuation, consists precisely in ceasing to blindly identify with the small ego and discovering little by little that vaster self we truly are. Jung, who studied Gnosticism deeply, who immersed himself in alchemical and mystical texts, saw with a scientist's clarity what the mystics had seen with contemplative eyes, that the ordinary I is a construction, a mask, a useful but superficial optical illusion, and that beneath it beats something infinitely greater. That is why Ana al-Haqq, I am the truth, understood in its true depth, was not the madness of a man who believed himself God in the sense of an ego inflated to megalomania. It was, truly understood, the most humble confession a human being can utter. Pay attention to this turn, because it changes everything. Al-Hallaj was not saying, I, Mansur, the cotton carder, with my history and my personality and my ambition, am the Almighty who governs the universe. He was saying exactly the opposite. He was saying, Mansur is no longer here. The small self called Mansur, the ego, the separate wave, has completely dissolved, has emptied itself to the bottom, has been annihilated. And in the hollow left by its disappearance, it is no longer Mansur who speaks, because Mansur is no longer there to speak. What speaks is the only thing left when the self stepped aside. The one reality, looking at itself and recognizing itself. The Sufis had a precise technical word for that state, and you are going to hear it several more times before this documentary ends, because it is one of the master keys to this entire story. They called it fana, annihilation, the extinction of the self, and they used an exact image to describe it, that of a candle lit in the depth of night. That small flame burns, has its shape, its identity, lights a corner. But when dawn comes and the sun rises, what happens to the candle's flame? It does not die. It is not violently destroyed. It simply becomes unnecessary, dissolving into a light infinitely greater than itself, one that contains and surpasses it. It can no longer be distinguished, not because it was annihilated in the sense of destroyed, but because it has been absorbed into something so immense that its small, separate light ceases to matter. That is Fana. The wave, for one glorious instant, remembered that it was ocean, and al-Hallaj said it aloud. And for saying it aloud, in a public square, before ordinary people instead of guarding it jealously among initiates, they killed him. But here comes the question that changes absolutely everything, the practical question, the only one that truly matters to you, listening to this right now, at home, in your car, in your insomnia, wherever you are. Very well. Fine. We are ocean disguised as wave. We are the source that has forgotten it is the source. We are the one light believing itself to be millions of separate reflections. It is a beautiful idea, a vertiginous one, even liberating to hear. Now what? What do I do with that in my actual life, with my actual problems, with my mind that will not stop? How does one remember what has been forgotten? How does the wave wake up? Because one thing is crystal clear. It does not wake up through theory. It does not wake up by reading 1,000 books about the unity of being, because, pay attention, that only fattens the very ego that must be dissolved. An ego that has read a great deal about enlightenment is still an ego, now proud of everything it knows besides. Something else is needed. A method, a tool, something that does not pass through the head, that does not feed the intellect, but acts directly on consciousness. Something so simple that an illiterate water carrier on the streets of Baghdad could do it without understanding a single word of metaphysics, and at the same time so powerful, so subversive, that an entire empire would want to forbid it under penalty of death. And that tool, it turns out, you already carry with you. You have carried it since the very first instant of your life, since your first cry at birth, and you will carry it until your last. It enters and leaves your body between 20 and 30,000 times a day, without rest, without your having to command it, faithful like nothing else in this world. And yet, almost certainly, never once in your entire life have you given it the attention it deserves. The answer, the key, the forbidden technology, is your own breath. We have reached exactly the midpoint of this journey. And if you have made it this far, if these words about the wave and the ocean, about the one light and its millions of reflections, have made something inside you vibrate that you are not quite sure how to name, I want you to know that this is no coincidence. Something in you recognizes this. Something in you, beneath the noise, always knew. I would like to ask you to pause, just for a moment, and leave me a comment on which of these three traditions, the Sufi tradition of al-Hallaj, the Upanishads of India, or the Gnostic tradition of the Mediterranean, resonated most strongly with you as you listened, because that often reveals through which particular door your own awakening is entering. And if you know someone who is lost, trapped between the weight of the past and the fear of the future, someone who needs to be reminded that they are an ocean and not a poor lonely wave, share this documentary with that person. Some knowledge is meant to travel from hand to hand, in silence, until it finds exactly the one who was searching for it, without even knowing it. Now, let us leave theory behind. We have seen the map. It is time to touch the territory. Let us go to the tool. Chapter 4. al-Anfas, the people of the breaths. The Sufis had a name for themselves that rarely surfaces outside their most intimate, most guarded texts. A name that reveals just how much what they practiced was a precise technology and not a vague devotion. They called themselves al-Anfas, the people of the breaths, those who breathe consciously, those who made breathing into an art, a science, a path, because they had discovered something that the yogis of India, the contemplative monks of the mountains, the Zen masters of Japan, and traditions across half the world, traditions that never once knew of each other, discovered independently. That breath is not just another bodily function, it is the one bridge connecting two worlds that normally remain separate, the bridge between the voluntary and the involuntary, between the conscious and the unconscious, between the body and that which lies beyond the body. Think about it for a second. Your heart beats without your being able to order it to stop. Your stomach digests without your permission. Your blood circulates. Your cells divide. Your liver works. And you have no conscious control over any of it. They are automatic functions, governed by the deep, the involuntary. And on the other hand, there are the actions you do control. Moving a hand, taking a step, speaking a word. Two separate kingdoms. But there is one single function in your entire organism that belongs to both kingdoms at once. Only one. The breath. You breathe without thinking about it, asleep, unconscious, in a coma, always, automatically. But you can also, at any instant, take command and breathe at will. Slower, deeper, hold it, release it. It is the only door with a handle on both sides. The one thread that, if you follow it with attention, carries you from the conscious surface down into the depths of what normally escapes your control. That is why the Sufis, and so many others, understood that whoever masters their breath holds in their hands the key to enter regions of themselves that most people never visit. But the al-Anfas went further, finer, subtler than almost any other tradition. They did not fixate primarily on the inhale, nor on the exhale, nor on spectacular forced breathing techniques. They fixated on something far more delicate, something almost every human being overlooks their entire existence without even suspecting it is there. They fixated on the pause, the space, the interval, the tiny silence that exists between the end of one exhalation and the beginning of the next inhalation. That gap, that minuscule crack in the rhythm of your breathing, that suspended moment when the air has already left completely and has not yet come back in. They called the breath Nafas. And the master who had reached full realization, who lived awake, they described with a phrase that, once you truly understand what it means, leaves you breathless. Ibn al-Waqt, the son of the instant, the child of the present moment. Pause on the beauty and precision of that phrase. Not the son of yesterday, dragging the weight of everything that was. Not the father of tomorrow, bound by his plans and his fears. The son of now, begotten and gone in every breath. Being born again, clean, whole, without history, in every exhalation, and dying softly to be born again in the next. A human being who drags no corpse of the past and casts no ghost of the future ahead, but lives, as they themselves said, breath by breath, each breath a birth and a death, each instant complete and sufficient in itself. Now look at what actually happens in that pause between breaths, because here lies the technical heart of this entire story, the reason an empire wanted to erase it from the world. That gap is a threshold, a portal. Think about it closely. While you inhale, there is an action, a movement, an effort. There is an I doing something, even if only breathing. While you exhale, another action, another movement, another doing. But in the interval, in that suspended space where the air has already left and has not yet returned, there is nothing to do. No action, no effort, no I occupied with anything. And if you bring your attention, fine, delicate, to that gap, you discover something truly astonishing, something that can change your life if you actually experience it and not merely hear it. In that instant, for a fraction of a second, the murmur stops. The radio that never turns off falls silent. The past is not there. The future is not there. The ceaseless voice in your head, the one that has not kept quiet for a single minute for as long as you can remember, goes mute. And in that brief silence, fragile as the flutter of an insect's wing, something surfaces that is not your character, that is not your story, that is not your fear or your ambition. Something surfaces that only observed, something that was there before you had a name, and that will still be there when you have forgotten everything. The Sufis said that in the space between two breaths, a door opens onto eternity. And they did not say it as a pretty poetic metaphor to decorate a poem. They said it with the almost cold precision of an engineer of the soul who had measured what he was describing. They had explored that gap thousands of times, They had mapped it. They knew that there, precisely there, linear time breaks. Because, and this is essential for you to understand, time, that river you believe is dragging you irremediably toward old age and death, is nothing more than the effect produced by your own mind leaping without rest, from memory to expectation, from past to future, from future to past, thousands of times a minute, weaving with those leaps the illusion of a continuous current. It is like film, still frames, separate fixed images, but passing so quickly, one after another, that your eye sees continuous motion where there are only separate instants. Stop the leap, even for a single second. Anchor yourself in the pause of the breath, and the river stops. Not because you have halted the universe, or the stars, or the aging of your physical body. It stops because you have stopped the machine inside your head that was manufacturing the illusion of the river. You have stepped, for an instant, outside the film, and seen that it was a film. That was the secret. That was the complete technology. So simple it is almost laughable once you finally understand it, and so powerful it is dizzying. You need nothing external, absolutely nothing. You need no temple, no priest, no sacred book, no tribute to pay, no permission to ask of any earthly or heavenly authority. You need not be learned, nor virtuous by any canon, nor belong to any caste of the chosen. You only need your own breath, which you already have, and the will and the attention to inhabit the space that exists between two breaths. There, free, available right now as you listen to my voice, where no one can take it from you or charge you for it or truly forbid it, lies the crack through which the prisoner escapes the invisible jail. Do you understand now, with total clarity, the threat this man represented? An entire system of power built, brick by brick, on the idea that you need authorized intermediaries to reach the sacred, and along comes a cotton carder, a nobody with no rank or title, to tell the poor, the illiterate, the discarded, that the key that opens the door to the divine hangs inside their own chest, rising and falling, free, faithful, since the day they were born. Of course they killed him. What would truly have defied all logic of power would have been letting him live. Because if that idea spread, if people truly learned to find that space of inner freedom for themselves, what would they still need the ones standing in the middle for? What power does a jailer hold over a prisoner who has discovered the door of his cell was never locked? And now pay attention to how conscious breathing literally cuts the cord, binding you to the illusion of the separate I. That I we spoke of in the previous chapter, the wave that forgot it was ocean, is not a solid, permanent thing existing somewhere inside your head. It is a process. It is an activity. It is something your mind is doing continuously, without stopping, the way someone keeps a plate spinning on a stick with small, constant taps. The I is sustained by an unceasing flow of self-referential thoughts. I did. I said. I want. I fear. I am like this. This happened to me. I should. That continuous narrative, that permanent commentary about yourself, is the glue holding the illusion of the separate self firm and solid. And when you, through the breath, bring your attention to the pause between two breaths, what happens to that stream of self-referential thoughts? It is interrupted. Even if only for an instant, the plate stops receiving the tap that kept it spinning. The story of the self runs out of fuel. And in that emptiness, in that crack, the illusion of being a small separate wave loosens, becomes transparent, and for a moment, what lies beneath surfaces, the ocean, the observer, that which needs no story to exist because it simply is. That is why conscious breath is the perfect tool of disconnection. It does not fight the system of control with more noise, more ideas, more beliefs that in turn become another cage. It gives you no new mantra to repeat until exhaustion, no affirmation to shout, no new dogma to cling to. It does something far more radical and far more silent. It takes you to the one place where all the machinery, ancient and modern alike, loses its grip, the pure present instant, the space between two breaths, where there is no past to feel guilty about and no future to fear, and therefore no surface for control to take hold of. It is the ultimate disconnection. You do not switch off the world. You switch off the machine inside you that was manufacturing your prison. For 1,000 years, someone could have said, with every appearance of reason, it is beautiful, it is poetic, but it is nothing more than that. Mystical comfort. Oriental metaphor for people who needed to believe in something transcendent. Pretty words with no real basis. And it is precisely there that history takes a turn. Neither al-Hallaj in his cell in Baghdad, nor Ibn Arabi in his luminous Andalusia could ever have imagined. Because in recent decades, in laboratories full of machines capable of photographing the living human brain in real time, in action, the most rigorous and most skeptical science, the kind that believes in absolutely nothing it cannot measure, weigh, and repeat, began, without meaning to look at exactly what happens to the brain of a person who anchors their attention in the breath. What happens, physically, measurably, when someone does exactly what the al-Anfas were doing in the streets of Baghdad more than 1,000 years ago. And what science found was not poetry. It was not metaphor. It was not comfort. What it found was the jailer, photographed, located, with a technical name and an exact address inside your skull. And alongside him, it found the key to silence him. That is what we are going to unearth now. Chapter 5. The Forbidden Validation. It was the year 2001 when a neurologist named Marcus Rachel, working at Washington University, stumbled by accident onto something no one had been looking for. And as so often happens in the history of science, that accident would completely change the way we understand the human mind. Rachel studied the brain with machines capable of photographing, in real time, which zones light up when a person performs a task. Subjects were asked to solve a math problem, to read, to memorize a list, and the researchers watched which regions lit up with activity. So far, all expected. But Rachel noticed something strange, something everyone until then had overlooked, the way one fails to see what sits too close to one's own eyes. When they asked the subject to stop performing the task, to simply rest, to do nothing at all, the brain did not switch off. It did not rest. On the contrary, an entirely different network lit up, a constellation of zones that glowed with activity precisely when the person was doing nothing. Rachel gave that network a name, the one that switches on when we do nothing. He called it the default mode network, the brain's default state, the state the mind returns to automatically the moment you let go of it. And I want you to pause on the choice of that word, default. It is the predetermined state. It is what the machine does when no one is consciously steering it. It is the mode in which you function during the overwhelming majority of your waking hours. And what exactly does that network do? What does the brain produce when you leave it in its default mode, without task, without focus, adrift? Here is where the chill should run through you from head to toe. The default mode network is responsible for what scientists call, with an almost poetic coldness, self-referential thought and mind-wandering. That is, it is the network that manufactures the murmur. It is the physical machinery made of neurons and connections that produces without rest the story of the I. It is what carries you back to yesterday's conversation, what rehearses tomorrow's argument, what replays your mistakes, what feeds your worries, what endlessly weaves the story of who you are, where you come from, and where you fear you are going. It is the voice that never stops. It is, literally, photographed, located, measured. The jailer the Sufis spoke of more than 1,000 years ago. Think about what this means. For centuries, mystics described an invisible enemy, an inner voice that never switches off, a noise that drags the mind away from the present, a force that keeps you trapped in past and future. They called it the sleep. They called it the veil. They called it, in some traditions, the ego, the lower nafs, the commentary of the self. And all of them, across every culture, agreed on one thing, that noise is the source of suffering, and silencing it is the door to liberation. And now, in the 21st century, a neurologist with a machine discovers, without setting out to, that there truly does exist a specific network inside the human skull that does exactly that, produce the self-referential murmur that tears us away from the present. It is not a metaphor, it is a physical structure. The ancients felt it, science photographed it. But the story does not end there, because the obvious question, the one anyone would ask, is this. If that network switches on by default, if it is the brain's automatic state, is there any way to turn it off? Can the jailer be silenced? And in 2011, a team of researchers from Yale University, led by a psychiatrist named Judson Brewer, decided to answer that question in the most direct way possible. They put experienced meditators, people who had spent thousands of hours of their lives training their attention, anchoring it again and again in the breath, exactly as the al-Anfas did in the streets of Baghdad, inside brain-scanning machines. And they observed, in real time, what happened to their default mode network while they meditated. The result was astonishing, and it was published in one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world. In the meditators, the default mode network was significantly quieter. The main zones that manufacture the murmur of the self, the very same ones that switch on by default in the rest of us, showed markedly lower activity. Those who had trained their attention on the breath had learned, literally, to turn down the volume on the jailer. Not with drugs, not with surgery, only with attention. Only with the ancient practice of bringing consciousness again and again to the present moment through the breath. Pause on the magnitude of this. What Brewer and his team demonstrated in a Yale laboratory, with machines worth millions of dollars, is exactly what al-Hallaj taught for free to the water carriers of Baghdad. That a noise exists inside the head. That this noise is the source of your prison. And that by anchoring attention in the breath, that noise can be silenced. 1100 years separate the cadre of souls from the psychiatrist at Yale. And yet, they are describing the same territory, the same jailer, the same key. One called it sleep and waking. The other called it the default mode network and its deactivation. But it is the same thing. It always was. And now we come to the most vertiginous part of all. Because up to this point, we have spoken of the murmur, of the self, of the jailer. But remember the promise this documentary opened with, the technology to stop time. And here, science offers us something that borders on the incredible. Two researchers, Mark Whitman and David Eagleman, spent years studying a question most people never even ask, because they take it for granted. Where does our sense of the passage of time come from? Where is the clock inside the brain? And what they discovered completely dismantles the idea you have of time. Because it turns out there is no organ of time. There is no single biological clock measuring the seconds. What exists is a construction. The brain manufactures the sensation of time. It produces it, and it produces it above all out of two ingredients: the memory of what happened and the anticipation of what is to come. That is, the past and the future. The brain takes the memory, compares it against the expectation, and out of that tension between what was and what will be, weaves the illusion of a continuous current we call time. Do you understand what this means? Linear time, that river you believe is dragging you toward old age and death, is, to a great extent, a product of the very same machinery that manufactures the murmur of the self. It is the prefrontal cortex, leaping ceaselessly between memory and anticipation, that generates the sense that an arrow exists, advancing inexorably from yesterday to tomorrow. And here is where everything converges, where the ancient myth and modern neuroscience fuse into a single burning point. Because if time is manufactured from the constant leap between past and future, and if that leap is produced by the default mode network, then silencing that network does not only mute the murmur of the self, it literally stops the machinery that manufactures time. Whitman went so far as to directly study what happens to the time perception of people in deep states of meditation. in those moments when attention is fully anchored in the present instant, and the subjects reported, again and again, the same experience, the sensation of the passage of time dissolved. It is not that the clock on the wall stopped, it is that the clock inside the head stopped manufacturing the illusion of the current. Past and future faded away, and only a vast wide present remained, without edges. A now that flowed nowhere, because no machine was projecting the flow. This is exactly what the Sufis called inhabiting the space between two breaths. This is exactly what it meant to be Ibn al-Waqt, the son of the instant. Not a poetic metaphor, a precise description of a verifiable neurological state in which the prefrontal cortex stops manufacturing the timeline, and consciousness remains suspended in a present that does not age because, quite simply, it does not advance. The ancients had no brain scanners. They had something better. They had themselves as a laboratory. They sat for hours, for years, observing their own minds with a patience nearly inconceivable to us today. And they mapped the interior territory with a precision science is only now beginning to confirm, 1,000 years later. I want you to fully absorb what we have just covered, because it changes the rules of the game. We are not saying the Sufis had lovely beliefs that happened to coincide with science. We are saying something far stronger, that they described in the symbolic language of their time real mechanisms of the human brain that neuroscience has only been able to photograph in the last 2 decades. The jailer exists, and it has a technical name, the default mode network. Linear time is, to a large extent, a construction of that machinery, and the key to silencing it, to stepping out of the timeline, to stopping the murmur, to glimpsing that present without edges, is exactly the one al-Hallaj carried inside his chest and taught for free to the outcasts of Baghdad, attention anchored in the breath. Now, I want to be completely honest with you, because this documentary does not seek to sell you magic, but something far more valuable: the truth. Science does not say meditating makes you immortal, nor that you can stop the aging of your cells by breathing a certain way, nor that a fountain of eternal youth is hidden in your lungs. None of that. Your physical body is born, matures, and one day shuts down, like everything that lived. What science does confirm, and what the mystics knew, is something subtler and perhaps deeper, that your experience of time, your sense of being trapped in a current dragging you along, is, to a great extent, a fabrication of your mind. And that fabrication can be paused, that you can step out, even if only for instants, of that current, that you can inhabit a present in which the weight of the past and the shadow of the future simply do not exist. And for a consciousness that learns to do that, for a human being who learns to live breath by breath in the pure instant, the terror of death and the weight of time begin, little by little, to lose their grip. And here we return, at last, to the question I left open at the beginning of this documentary. The one I asked you to hold close to your chest, do you remember? Why did a man who was about to be beaten, mutilated, beheaded and burned smile? Why does tradition tell for 1,000 years that al-Hallaj laughed and danced on the way to the scaffold? For centuries it seemed like the exaggeration of fanatical disciples, or the madness of an illuminated man. But now you hold the pieces to understand it. A man who had learned to inhabit the space between 2 breaths, a man whose default mode network, to put it in today's cold language, had gone silent to a degree almost none of us ever reach. A man for whom linear time was no longer a current dragging him toward the terror of the end, but a vast present without edges. A man who no longer identified with the small, frightened wave, but with the ocean. For a man like that, what exactly is it that dies on the scaffold? That is the question we are going to answer now, in full, holding nothing back. We are going to walk with him through his final steps. We are going to enter, at last, the fire. Chapter 6. The Man Who Laughed in the Fire. 9 years in a cell. Think about it again, now that you know what you know. 9 years in which the empire did not know what to do with him. Because this is one of the most revealing details of the entire story, one the chroniclers of the time recorded, and modern scholarship has confirmed. Al-Hallaj was not killed for what he said. or not only for that. He was killed for what he represented on the chessboard of power. During those 9 years of imprisonment, Baghdad seethed. The Abbasid Caliphate, that dazzling empire, was rotting from within. Palace intrigues, corruption, factional struggles had turned the court into a nest of vipers. And at the center of that web stood a key man, the vizier, the head of government, the one pulling the strings behind the throne. The documents of the era show something that should feel terribly familiar to you, because it repeats in every age of human history. Power did not care about al-Hallaj's theology. It cared about his influence. It cared that this mystic had followers everywhere, even inside the palace itself, even among officials and courtiers. It cared that a movement was growing around him, and that this movement spoke of an inner authority, answerable to no vizier and no caliph. The vizier of that moment, a shrewd and ruthless man, understood something every tyrant in history has understood. The best way to crush a movement is not only to kill its leader, but to discredit him, turn him into a heretic, wrap him in a religious trial that transforms him, in the eyes of the people, from venerated teacher into abominable blasphemer. That way power did not appear to be murdering a saint, but defending the faith from an impostor. It is a move as old as power itself, and as current as today's headlines. When someone becomes inconvenient, you do not fight what he truly represents. You label him. You turn him into a monster. You strip him of his dignity before you strip him of his life. And so, after 9 years, the final trial was staged. A tribunal of religious jurists, charges of heresy, and at the center of it all, those 3 words that never left him. Ana al-Haqq. I am the truth. That was enough. The sentence was death. And not just any death, but one designed to be a spectacle, a warning burned into the collective memory of anyone who might ever think of following his path. It was March 26th of the year 922. They took him from the cell he had inhabited for nearly a decade. They led him through the streets of Baghdad toward the place of execution, on the banks of the Tigris, that same river that would soon receive his ashes. And here, at this exact point, is where historical record fuses with legend, where fact and myth intertwine so thoroughly they can no longer be separated, and where the image is born that has traveled more than 1,000 years to reach you now in this documentary. Because the witnesses, and above all the tradition that gathered and passed down what happened that day, recounted something that defies all human logic. They said al-Hallaj did not walk toward his death the way a condemned man walks. He walked, they say, with a light step, almost dancing, moving with an incomprehensible joy, dragging his chains as though they were festival ornaments. And when they asked him, stunned, how he could behave that way before the horror awaiting him, the answer tradition attributes to him is one of the most staggering phrases any human being has ever spoken. He said, "So it is told," that he was going to meet his beloved, that the execution was not his end, but his wedding, that one who is about to merge at last with what he has loved his entire life. How could he not dance on his way to the altar? Remember everything we have traveled through together. Remember Fana, the annihilation of the ego, the candle dissolving into the light of dawn. Remember the wave that remembers it is ocean. For the rest of mortals, death is the end of the self, the terrifying extinction of the character we believe ourselves to be, the abyss. But for a man who had already dissolved that self in life, who had already died before dying, who had already emptied himself to the bottom, what was left to fear? The terror of death is the wave's terror of disappearing. But if you already know, not as an idea, but as a lived experience in your own flesh, that you were never only the wave, that you were always also the ocean, then the death of the body ceases to be the end of everything. It becomes what al-Hallaj said it was, the return, the drop returning to the sea, the flame dissolving into the sun. The Sufis had an expression for this, one still repeated in their circles today. Die before you die. Die before you die, they said, and you will never die when you die. Because whoever has died to the separate self while still breathing whoever has crossed through Fana while alive, has already made the only journey that matters. Physical death, when it comes, is little more than a formality. A change of clothes. The body falls, but that which one truly is, that which was never born because it was never a separate thing, cannot die, because it was never confined to the body now shutting down. And then the moment came. The chronicle is of a rawness that takes the breath away. First, they whipped him, hundreds of lashes, they say, until he was on the verge of unconsciousness. Then they cut off his hands, then his feet. And here, tradition carries another of those phrases that cross the centuries. While the blood ran from his mutilated wrists, they say al-Hallaj wiped it across his face, staining his cheeks red. And when they asked him why, he answered that he was performing his ablution, the ritual washing every Muslim performs with water before prayer. But the lover's ablution, he said, is not done with water, it is done with one's own blood. He was preparing himself for the final prayer, the definitive one, the one prayed at the very threshold of the encounter. They beheaded him. And as if the beheading were not enough, as if power had not yet made its warning clear enough, they burned his body. They reduced to ashes what remained of that man. And then, in the final gesture, the most revealing of all, they threw those ashes into the Tigris River. Why? Why such cruelty toward a body already without life? Because power feared something beyond death. It feared the grave. It feared that the place where his remains lay would become a shrine, a site of pilgrimage, a spark from which his movement could grow and burn again. They wanted nothing left. Not a bone, not a relic, not a single point on the map where his followers could bow. They wanted to erase him from the world entirely, and they failed. They failed in the most complete way a power can fail. Because here we are, more than 1100 years later, in a language that did not exist when he lived, through a technology he could never have imagined, speaking of him, saying his name, repeating his words. The vizier who ordered his death, the caliph who approved it, the entire empire that crushed him, are today mere footnotes in history books, names no one remembers, dust as scattered as the ashes thrown into the river. But al-Hallaj is still alive. His words still kindle hearts. And that, perhaps, is the last and most beautiful secret of his story, that they tried to erase him by casting him into the river, and the river carried him to the sea, and the sea returned him to the entire world, exactly as he had taught happens with every drop that returns to the ocean. There is one final image tradition preserves, and with it I want to close this chapter, because it condenses everything this man represented. They say that while he was being tortured, while his body was being destroyed piece by piece, al-Hallaj kept smiling, and that a disciple, torn apart by the pain of watching his master suffer this way, asked him how it was possible, how he could smile in the midst of such torment. And the answer attributed to him is the perfect synthesis of this entire teaching. He said, more or less, that what they were destroying was not him, that they could cut the hands that had written, the feet that had walked, the tongue that had spoken, the head that had thought, but that him, what he truly was, they could not touch, because he was not located in any of those places. He no longer lived in the body, he lived in the instant, he lived in the breath, he lived in that timeless space where no sword arrives, where no fire burns, where no empire holds jurisdiction. That was the secret they killed him for, and that was exactly the living proof that the secret was true. Because a man who smiles while being torn apart is either completely mad or has found something real, something so real that not even the most extreme pain, not even the most brutal death can tear it away from him. Al-Hallaj staked his entire life, down to his last drop of blood, on the wager that this something was real, and the way he died was his final, most powerful argument. Now then, it is very easy to admire a martyr from 1,000 years ago. It is very easy to be moved by his story, to feel the chill, and then close the documentary and go back to the timeline, to the murmur, to the invisible prison, as if nothing had happened. But that would betray everything al-Hallaj lived and died to teach, because he did not want admirers. He wanted you, precisely you, to find for yourself that space he found, that timeless place, that crack between two breaths through which the prisoner escapes. And the moment has come for you to stop hearing about it and begin experiencing it. The moment has come for the practice. The moment has come for you, yourself, now, to find the door. Chapter 7. The Disconnection. Do not close your eyes yet. First listen to what we are about to do, so that afterward, you can do it without interrupting yourself. Over the next few minutes, you are not going to learn anything new. I am not going to give you any more information. On the contrary, you are going to let go. You are going to stop accumulating. Because everything we have traveled through in this documentary, the entire story of al-Hallaj, the whole doctrine of Ibn Arabi, all the science of the default mode network, is worth absolutely nothing if it stays in your head as just another idea. As a pretty fact to mention at dinner, the only way this transforms you is if you try it, now, in your own body, in your own breath. And I want you to understand something before we begin, something that frees you from any pressure. You cannot do this wrong. There is no failing at this. We are not going to repeat mantras. We are not going to recite affirmations. You are not going to try to believe anything or feel anything special or reach any extraordinary state. The only thing you are going to do is the simplest thing a human being can do. Observe your own breath. And specifically, you are going to look for one very particular place, the space, the pause, the crack, that tiny gap between the end of one exhalation and the beginning of the next inhalation. That is where the child of the instant lives. That is where time loosens. That is where we are going. So, if you are in a safe place, and please, do not do this while driving or operating any machinery, settle in. Sit in a way that lets your spine be upright but without tension, like a mountain, firm at the base, light at the summit. Let your hands rest where they fall. And when you are ready, let your eyes close softly. Good. Do not change your breathing. Do not force it. Do not try to breathe deeply or slowly or in any special way. Just let it be exactly as it is, and simply watch it. Like someone sitting on a riverbank, watching the water pass without touching it. The air comes in. The air goes out. You just watch. Feel where the air enters. Perhaps you notice it, cool, at the tip of your nose. Feel it descend. How your chest, your belly, expand softly. And now feel how the air leaves again. How the body loosens as it releases it. Do nothing. Just accompany it. In. Out. And now, pay very delicate, very fine attention to what happens right when you finish exhaling. When the air has already left completely. Just before the body on its own decides to inhale again. There is a space there, a small silence. An instant in which no air is entering and no air is leaving. An instant in which you are doing absolutely nothing. Look for it. There it is. Do not stretch it out. Do not hold your breath by force. Just notice that it exists, that gap, that natural pause, and stay there with your attention resting on that space, as light as a feather on water. Exhale and observe the pause. In that space, notice there is no thought. For an instant, the voice goes quiet. The murmur stops. There is no past there. There is no future there. There are no problems, no plans, no memories, no fears. There is only a small, clean silence, and something, inside you, simply observing that silence. There it is, that which observes, that which becomes aware of the silence. That is not your thought, because thought has gone quiet. That is not your story, because your story is not here in this instant. That is what existed before all your thoughts, and what remains when they fall silent. The Sufis searched for it. Al-Hallaj lived there. Let us give it a simple name. The observer. Keep breathing. And now, a thought will almost certainly appear. It will slip in. you will start thinking about something, what you have to do, whether you are doing this right, anything at all. Perfect. That is exactly what the mind does. Do not fight the thought. Do not get frustrated. Do not try to expel it. Just notice that it appeared, and the moment you notice you were thinking, look. At that precise instant, you are no longer the thought. You are the one who noticed. You are once again the observer. And with complete gentleness, without any violence, bring your attention back to the breath, to the pause, to the space between two breaths. That is the whole secret. Listen closely, because there is nothing more to it. The thought appears, you notice, and you return to the breath. Again and again. The thought is not the enemy. Identifying with it was the prison. And every time you notice and return, you are doing exactly what the Carder of Souls taught in the streets of Baghdad 1100 years ago. You are carding your own soul, separating the fibers, letting the light through. Stay here a few more moments in silence, just you and your breath. Exhale, find the pause, rest in the observer. And when a thought pulls you away, smile inwardly and return. Silence. Notice now something. In these minutes, where was the weight of your past? Where was the anxiety of your future? For a few instants, they were not there. You stepped, if only for a moment, out of the timeline. You found the crack, and you needed nothing and no one to do it, only your breath, which you have carried with you since your first day and which will accompany you until your last. And now, very slowly, without hurry, let your attention return to the space where you are. Feel the weight of your body, the sounds around you, and when you are ready, open your eyes. What you just did, something so small, so simple, almost laughable in its simplicity, is the technology for which a man was executed. It is the key an empire wanted to throw to the bottom of a river, and now it is yours. No one can take it from you. It requires no permission, no money, no intermediary. It is in your chest, rising and falling, right now. The Sufis said that a single instant of true presence is worth more than years of mechanical prayer. Not because prayer is bad, but because a single instant in which you are truly here, awake, in the space between two breaths, is an instant in which you have escaped the prison. And once you know the door opens, once you have crossed the threshold even for 3 seconds, you can never fully believe again that the cell was locked. That is the disconnection. That is the hack. The legacy of the Carder. Let us return one last time to the river, to the Tigris, wide and slow, carrying toward the sea the ashes of a man an entire empire wanted erased from the face of the earth. Picture the scene. The executioners gathering what remained after the fire, the handful of grey dust cast into the water, the vizier's officials watching, satisfied, certain they had won, certain that this problem, this inconvenient mystic, this cotton carder who dared to say, "I am the truth," and to teach the poor how to breathe freedom, had been dissolved forever in the current. How little they understood. How little those who only know how to look at the wave and never learn to see the ocean ever understand. Because what they threw into the river that day was not an ending. It was a seed. And the water, which al-Hallaj loved so much, which he had used as an image of the drop returning to the sea, did with his ashes exactly what he always knew it would. It carried them, it scattered them, it returned them to the great body of water from which everything comes. And from there, invisible, his words kept traveling, from mouth to mouth, from secret disciple to secret disciple, in manuscripts copied in hiding and saved from the fire, in verses poets repeated without always daring to say whose they were. 3 centuries later, in distant Andalusia, Ibn Arabi would drink from that same source and raise it to the summits of human thought. Centuries later still, Rumi would set the whole world dancing to the same truth dressed in poetry. And here, today, 1100 years later, in a language that did not exist when he breathed, that seed germinates again, in you. The ancient mystics were right about something that now, after everything we have traveled through together, perhaps you begin to see with different eyes. You cannot kill a truth. You can kill the man who speaks it. You can burn the books that contain it. You can forbid it, censor it, cast its ashes into the deepest river. But truth does not live in the man, nor in the book, nor in the ashes. Truth lives in the place from which any human being, in any age, can rediscover it for themselves. And that place, we have seen, is not in any distant temple, nor in any secret text. It is in the space between your next two breaths. It is indestructible because you carry it with you. It is unerasable because it is reborn in every chest that learns to look within. Think of what we have unearthed in these hours. We began with a brutal image, a man beaten, mutilated, beheaded, and burned for breathing a certain way. And at first it seemed like a story of horror and fanaticism, one more from humanity's dark past. But look where we have arrived. We discovered that this man was not a victim. He was a master who staked his entire life, down to his last drop of blood, on the wager that there was something within us no sword can touch. We discovered that the phrase that condemned him, "I am the truth," was not the arrogance of a madman, but the most humble confession possible, that of a wave that remembered it was ocean. We discovered that the invisible prison the ancients spoke of, the sleep, the veil, the murmur that never stops, today has a name and a photograph in neuroscience laboratories, and it is called the default mode network. We discovered that linear time, that river we believed was dragging us irremediably toward old age and death, is largely a construction of our own mind, a machine manufacturing past and future without rest. And we discovered that this machine can be paused, that a crack exists, and that the key to finding it is the humblest, most everyday, most free thing we possess, the breath. And I want you to take something very concrete from all of this, something that is not just a passing emotion. Take with you the certainty that the next time you feel the weight of the past crushing you, that conversation that went wrong, that mistake you cannot forgive yourself for, that loss that still aches, you have a way out. And that the next time you feel the grip of anxiety about the future, that bill, that uncertainty, that fear of what is coming, you have a place where neither of those forces can reach you. Not in theory, not in belief, in your own breath, in the space between two breaths, in the pure present, where neither guilt nor fear has jurisdiction, because both need a time that, there, simply does not exist. This is what the Carder of Souls wanted. Not for you to admire him, not for you to mourn him. He wanted you to take the tangled, tightly matted cotton of your own mind and card it, to separate the fibers, to let the light through. He wanted you to become, too, a child of the instant, even if only for 3 seconds a day. Because every one of those instants is a silent victory over every jailer, ancient and modern alike. Every one of those instants is an act of the deepest, most unbreakable freedom there is. The freedom that depends on no external circumstance, that no wall can enclose, that no fire can burn. You have completed a journey very few dare to make. You did not just hear a story, you lived it, you breathed it, you tried it in your own body, and that knowledge now lives in you, not as a fact, but as an experience. But this is only a door. Behind it lies an entire palace of wisdom that was persecuted, censored, and nearly erased, and yet survived, as all truths survive, hidden in the currents of history, waiting for whoever would come looking for it. If what you experience today kindled something in you, I especially want to recommend 2 journeys that continue exactly this frequency. The first is our documentary, Die Before You Die, The Sufi Secret, where we go deeper into that vertiginous teaching al-Hallaj embodied until the end, how the mystics learned to pass through the death of the ego while still breathing, and why that changes absolutely everything. And the second is The Forbidden Secret of the Upanishads, where you will discover that thousands of miles from Baghdad in ancient India, sages spoke a twin phrase to I am the truth, Aham Brahmasmi, I am the absolute, revealing that this secret never belonged to a single tradition, but to all of humanity. Subscribe to this channel and activate the bell, because here we keep rescuing one by one these treasures someone decided were too dangerous for you. Leave me one thing in the comments, how you felt in that space between two breaths, in that small silence you found during the practice. I want to read you. And if this journey transformed something in you, share it with someone you know is trapped between the weight of what was and the fear of what will be. Some knowledge is destined to find, in silence, exactly the one who needs it. And remember, every time life drags you along, every time you feel time pushing you forward without mercy, that you have a refuge no one can take from you. Exhale, find the pause, and there, in that tiny, eternal space between two breaths, you will hear, if you pay attention, the echo of a man who, 1100 years ago, laughed in the fire, because he had discovered what you have just touched, that what we truly are was never born, and therefore can never die. The carder of souls keeps carding. Now, through you, we'll see you on the next forbidden frequency,